In softball action, the Marietta Lady Tigers took on the Belpre Lady Golden Eagles. Lucy Rubel kick-started the offense for Belpre, lining one into left for a quick little single. But that's all that would come of it, as Chloe Harris would shut the door for the Lady Golden Eagles, ending the inning with a strikeout. Now in the bottom of the first, Chloe Bills, she's going to hit one that's going to find some grass in left field, and she's also on with a single. Now in scoring position, Samantha Mayo sends one right back up the middle that pushes across a run for the Lady Tigers. But trouble fielding the ball allows Mayo to take 2 extra bases. The Lady Golden Eagles would get out of the jam as Rubel would force a pop-up to the first baseman, and that would get them out of the inning. Now bottom of the second, Keely Hansen, she's going to hit one hard right back up the middle, and that's going to take an interesting hop and get past the center fielder, and she's going to turn on the afterburners here, rounding second, and she's not going to stop at third. Look at that speed, and she's going to slide in safely as Marietta scores double-digit runs and takes game 1 of the doubleheader.